Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Got an important update for you regarding the current energy crisis, the current energy warfare going on between the East and the West, and that is that the G7 nations, and that includes Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US, have just announced that they have agreed to set a price cap on Russian oil. And in that announcement, they claimed that their motivation was to reduce Russian revenues and Russia's ability to fund its war of aggression. And that is what we are seeing most of the media coverage of this announcement focus on. But there is a lot more than meets the eye to this story. And that's what I want to get into in this video. And also, I want to talk about the Russian response to this announcement and what this could mean for the global economy, for the dollar, and for gold and silver. So let's get to it. So first off, I do just want to say a big thank you for tuning into the video today. If you enjoy it and you get some value from it, please do give it a big thumbs up down below. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to the channel? Okay, so yes, I am sure that the G7 nations would love to hurt Russian oil revenue, but the real motivation for this price cap is something you probably won't hear mentioned in the mainstream, and it has to do with the sixth package of economic sanctions that the EU passed against Russia back in June. And this is a press release put out by the EU on June 3rd, and it's related to that package of sanctions, which has already passed. I want to emphasize that. This is in place, and certain elements of it simply haven't gone into effect yet. And we'll go ahead and skip ahead to part 2 of this press release here, where they talk about oil transport services. And I'll just read to you what they said in the press release. After a wind-down period of 6 months, EU operators will be prohibited from insuring and financing the transport, in particular through maritime routes, of oil to third countries. This will make it particularly difficult for Russia to continue exporting its crude oil and petroleum products to the rest of the world, since EU operators are important providers of such services. So remember, this was put out on June 3rd, so a 6-month wind-down period means that all of this is set to go into effect roughly in January of 2023. They say that EU operators are important providers of such services, and they are. I believe about 90% of insurance that Russian oil vessels get is either from EU or UK-based insurance companies. And the reason that insuring these vessels is so important is that really, oil tankers have to be insured to operate. Places like the Suez Canal, for example, will not allow the transit of a ship unless it possesses insurance. And I'm sure there's all sorts of considerations. Maybe certain ports won't let you dock. You know, if there's an actual accident or an oil spill or something like that, that can be incredibly costly. So you want to have insurance on these vessels. And withdrawing that insurance could cause a major disruption to Russia's ability to export crude oil via ships and via maritime routes. The West is not completely clueless about what this means. Of course, if this is allowed to go into effect, it's going to drive the price of crude oil up drastically around the world. Russia is a major exporter of oil, and so if they have a hard time delivering that oil to market, it's going to cause major supply problems and a spike in price. And, you know, the G7 is aware of that. They've been talking about this idea of a price cap since June, right around the time this package of sanctions was passed. And this is an article from June 28th from Reuters. The G7 agrees to explore a cap on Russian oil price. This was the first mention I heard of this. What the real objective here is, they want to set this price cap on Russian oil. And when this ban on the insurance of Russian oil vessels goes into effect, what they plan to do is say, well, we're not going to insure your vessels, but if you agree to sell the oil below market price and you agree to this price cap scheme, then we'll go ahead and continue to provide insurance. And what the West really wants here in the G7 is they want to have their cake and eat it too, because they want Russia to be prohibited from getting revenue from selling this oil, but at the same time, they don't want to see a massive economic catastrophe brought on by a spike in the price of oil. So this whole scheme is basically to allow the G7 to give Russia this loophole so they can keep selling their oil. But predictably, the Russians aren't interested in this. You know, they came out pretty strongly. This is from TASS.ru, so this is Russian state media. This came out yesterday, and this was the Deputy Minister of the Russian Federation, Alexander Novak, saying that anyone who signs on for this cap or this restriction scheme, Russia's going to ban the supply of oil to those countries. What he said exactly, and mind you, this is a translation via Google, so might sound a little strange, but I'll just go ahead and read what he said here. Said, as for price limits, if they impose a price limit, then we are just for such companies or countries that impose restrictions. We will not supply them with oil and oil products, since we will not work on non-market conditions. And he went on to say that the restrictions on the price of Russian oil are complete absurdity, and this is an interference in the market mechanisms of such an important industry as the oil industry, which is the most important in terms of ensuring the energy security of the whole world. Such attempts will only lead to destabilization of the oil industry and the oil market. And so, the Russians are not going to sign up for this. And he went on to say that, he hadn't heard of India or China or any of the OPEC plus countries agreeing to participate in this. And I really don't think there's much chance of that happening. I can't imagine China, for example, who is currently at odds with the U.S. over Taiwan, signing on to any kind of cap scheme. The Indians, I don't think they're going to. I mean, they have really already been benefiting a lot from discounted Russian oil that they've been purchasing. And so, I think they're okay with the status quo. So it doesn't seem like this cap scheme is going to have much chance of going into effect and succeeding. Of course, the G7 hasn't even announced what the specific cap is going to be or any of the details at this point, but I think it's kind of a pointless endeavor for them to keep planning this out because I don't think it has a chance of going into effect. But, what does all of this mean for gold and silver and the dollar in the U.S. economy? Well, unless the EU backs down and rescinds their promise to ban insuring these vessels, we're going to see a major spike in the price of oil in January, sometime around the beginning of 2023. And there's other factors at play there as well. Don't forget that the sales of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to the tune of about 1 million barrels a day, or more than 5% of total U.S. consumption, those are going to be ending at the end of October. And so there's a number of factors that are kind of aligning here that implies that we're going to see a massive energy crisis toward the end of 2022, the beginning of 2023. And I suspect that that could actually be the event that forces the Fed to pivot on their interest rate hikes. Because think about it, we've got already massive energy price hikes in Europe. The energy prices in Europe right now for fuel and electricity are something like 10 times the average price that they were paying over the past decade. And so that is its own crisis in and of itself. We've got the flow of natural gas from Russia to Europe being cut dramatically. That's contributing to that crisis. Again, we've got the sale of the SPR oil. That's going to be ending towards the end of the year. And we've already got the Fed hiking interest rates into a recession. So a pretty bad scenario is being laid out in front of us for the economy. And if we do see that massive spike of oil, if we see oil go to $150 or $200 or $300, I think all of that is within the realm of possibilities. I mean, we saw what happened to the price of oil when the Russians invaded Ukraine in February, massive spike up. So prices have come down a bit since then. A lot of it has to do with the depression and the recession fears, but there is some inelastic demand for energy that just has to be met. And, if the Russian supply of oil via maritime routes gets cut for any long period of time, we're going to see a huge increase in the price of oil. And so all of this, I think, does have some very significant implications for the price of gold, for the price of silver. Of course, if the Fed is forced to capitulate, forced to pivot and begin easing again, begin purchasing U.S. treasuries, begin cutting rates, then we are going to see an explosion in the price of gold, silver, commodities around the world, especially if this is coinciding with a major increase in the price of energy. And I don't think I have to tell you what this is going to mean for inflation if any of this comes to pass. Now, maybe it won't. Maybe cooler heads will prevail in the West. Maybe they'll abandon this scheme to cap the price of Russian oil. But I'm not so sure that's going to happen. I'm not sure that there is the political will to reverse these sanctions in the short time between now and the end of the year. So we're going to see what happens. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. How do you think this could affect the dollar? How do you think it could affect energy markets and precious metals? I would love to hear what you have to say. And I just want to say thank you all very much for watching. I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.